For 37 years, one man designed every menswear collection Hermès ever sold. 37 years. Longer than most fashion houses survive. Longer than most marriages last. In that time, the world changed twice over, and the coat did not. And then, quietly, without a scandal, without a boardroom coup, it ended. What happened at Hermès is not a story about one designer retiring. It is the last move in the largest reshuffling of creative power the luxury industry has ever seen. In roughly 24 months, nearly every major house on earth replaced the person who decides what it means. Dior, Chanel, Gucci, Balenciaga, Balmain, Hermès menswear, Fendi. This is the story of what those chairs are actually worth. And why, when the money got tight, the first thing every billionaire owner reached for was a new pair of hands. To understand why the reshuffle matters, you have to understand what it replaced. Véronique Nichanian joined Hermès menswear in 1988. She stayed until 2025. 37 years is not a career in fashion. It is a geological era. In an industry that treats designers like quarterbacks, hiring them for one good season and firing them after one bad one, Nichanian did something almost nobody else was permitted to do. She was boring on purpose. She refined rather than reinvented. The Hermès man got a slightly better jacket every year for 4 decades, and Hermès quietly became one of the most profitable companies in Europe. That is the thing people miss about luxury. The margin is not in the newness. The margin is in the belief that the thing you bought will still be correct in 20 years. Continuity is not the absence of strategy. Continuity is the strategy. And it worked. While competitors chased relevance through constant creative churn, Hermès grew into the house that other houses measure themselves against. By the mid-2020s, as the broader luxury sector fell into its worst slump in a generation, Hermès was the one holding steady while giants stumbled. So when Hermès finally named a successor for menswear, it was not a personnel announcement. It was a statement about whether the most disciplined house in fashion still believed its own doctrine. They chose Grace Wales Bonner. A designer whose entire body of work is about cultural memory, diaspora, tailoring as an archive of who people have been. Someone who does not treat clothing as a seasonal product but as a document. Which, if you squint, is the most Hermès idea imaginable, arriving in a completely unfamiliar body. Now widen the lens, because Hermès was not acting alone. It was the last chair to stop moving. Across roughly 2 years, the industry replaced almost every creative director that matters. Olivier Rousteing left Balmain after 14 years, succeeded by Antonin Tron. Maria Grazia Chiuri moved to Fendi. New hands took over at Dior, at Chanel, at Gucci, at Balenciaga, at Jean-Paul Gaultier. Analysts started calling it fashion's great game of musical chairs, and by 2026 they were finally saying the music had stopped. Here is what almost every commentator got wrong about it. This was reported as a creative story. It was a financial one. Luxury spending from the world's elite had slowed. Chinese demand cooled. The aspirational middle, the customers who stretched for one handbag a year, quietly stopped stretching. Houses that had spent a decade raising prices faster than they raised quality suddenly found the arithmetic turning against them. When a luxury conglomerate cannot grow by raising prices, and cannot grow by adding customers, it has exactly one lever left. Desire. And desire, in this industry, has a name and a face and a runway show. So they bought new faces. Not because the old ones failed, but because a new creative director is the only legal way to reset a customer's expectations without admitting anything went wrong. A new designer gives you permission to change the product, change the price architecture, change the story, and call all of it a vision rather than a correction. Think about the asymmetry here. A creative director costs a house a few million a year. A failed brand repositioning costs hundreds of millions. In that light, the churn is not chaos. It is the cheapest option management had. And it explains something else. Notice how many of these hires were not safe. Houses reached for designers with strong points of view, sometimes from outside the traditional Paris-Milan pipeline. That is not generosity. That is a sector betting that mild competence will no longer move product, and that only a genuinely divisive vision can restart the conversation. So what is one of these jobs actually worth? Consider what a creative director controls. Not just the clothes on the runway, which are, for most houses, a rounding error in revenue. They control the aesthetic license that everything else borrows from. The perfume. The sunglasses. The leather goods. The lipstick. The entrance to the brand that costs $90 and funds the entire operation. The runway is a loss leader that sets the price of everything downstream. That is why a single show can move a multi-billion euro valuation. And that is why the person who decides what walks down it is, in pure financial terms, one of the most leveraged individuals in any consumer business on earth. But there is a catch, and it is the thing the Hermès story exposes. Leverage cuts both ways over time. A new director can restart the conversation, yes. But they also reset the clock. Every reset costs the house a little of the accumulated belief that made the product expensive in the first place. Nicanian's 37 years were not just stability. They were compound interest on trust. When you replace a designer, you are spending down that balance in exchange for a burst of attention. Do it once, and you get a renaissance. Do it every 3 years across an entire industry, and you slowly teach the customer that nothing is permanent, that the thing they paid a fortune for was always just this season's opinion. The houses that understand this are the ones that will still be here in 20 years. The ones that don't will keep buying attention with credibility until the credibility runs out. That is the real question hanging over fashion right now. Not whether the new directors are talented. Most of them plainly are. The question is whether an industry built on the promise of permanence can survive discovering how much it enjoys change. There is a version of this story where the reshuffle works. Where the new hands deliver, the collections land, the slump ends, and everybody agrees the churn was necessary. And there is a version where, 10 years from now, someone looks back at a 37-year tenure the way we look at cathedrals. Impressive. Inexplicable. Not something anyone would attempt today. Real wealth, the kind that outlives the person who made it, has almost always come from the same unglamorous place. Someone decided to be good at one thing for an unreasonably long time, and refused to be interesting about it. Fashion just spent 2 years betting the opposite. We are about to find out who was right. If you got something out of this, subscribe. This channel goes deep on the money behind the things everyone else covers as culture. And tell me in the comments, is a 37-year tenure the greatest asset a luxury house can own, or the thing that was quietly killing it? I read every one.